So let me ask you about this issue of where the state of Israel is today. There's angst, anxiety among Jews, among friends of Israel, in America, in Israel, and around the world, on the resilience of, shall we say, the Jewish democracy, the institutions of the state of Israel, the perception of integrity in government and the judiciary and the institutions that matter. In your view, from where you sit, is this issue moving in the right direction? How serious is this problem? Or do you think that the issue is being addressed appropriately?
First of all, I would like to say that democracy is democracy. Even Jewish democracy, when you are talking about, and you are looking to our eldest at the beginning of the first century, the Talmud people, the Talmud rabbis, the Talmud teachers, the Talmud philosophers, they had a lot of differences of opinion, to say the least. And what the decision was brought to be was the decision of the majority. We are saying, there is a phrase in Hebrew that people are learning from generation to generation, that the words of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and everyone who knows the idea of Judaism and the philosophers of Judaism, the people who have created the tradition, it's an outcome of the Ten Commandments and the Bible, were saying that the words of Beit Shammai and the words of Beit Hillel are the words of God. Nevertheless, the rule is like Beit Hillel. And I was asking my father, who was a professor in the university, but really Talmid Chacham, really one who understood Judaism and was almost fulfilling 613 mitzvahs. How come, Daddy? How come? Tell me. I'm only 14 years old. Tell me. How come? Both of them are words of God, and nevertheless you say, and the rule is according to Beit Hillel. And he said to me, you know why Beit Hillel had the majority all the time? Because they were speaking to Beit Shammai. They were trying to understand what Beit Shammai is saying to them. They really wanted to understand. Sometimes they were convinced, and sometimes they rejected and gave really answers to the way of thinking of Beit Shammai, because they heard what the other side has to say, and they respect the idea that maybe they are saying something which could convince them. They were elected to be the people who are ruling the real, who are getting the power of the majority of the Jewish people during the time. But you have to understand, we are in Israel, have democracy. Nevertheless, for the last 73 years, we didn't manage to really frame a constitution. You know, Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, when the Knesset was formed and was brought to Jerusalem, he and all the founders of the state of Israel, and I was the speaker of the Israeli Knesset, really thought that we need constitution to be arranged within 6 months. And he have defined, and he named the law committee to be the Law and Constitution Committee, ordering them that in 6 months they have to bring constitution to the state of Israel. Nevertheless, of course, they did not manage to get, also because prime minister of all generations didn't want too much a constitution, because in order to change constitution, you have to need 80 members of Knesset, 2/3. And if you can use only majority, it's much more easier for every prime minister in Israel. So I can blame also all the prime ministers in Israel during the years, from Ben-Gurion till Bibi Netanyahu, passing Peres and Rabin and all and all the others. Why? Why we couldn't manage also to get a constitution? Because they were saying, the leaders of Israel, we need the support of the minorities. Because constitution, without the idea that the constitution is protecting the minorities, what do we need constitution for? And the minorities in Israel, which were two minorities, the ultra-Orthodox and the Israeli Arab, rejected the idea that the constitution of Israel, the headline would be, Israel is the state, is a Jewish state and democratic one. Israel is a Jewish democratic state, not less Jewish and not less democracy. We even said that no one, even 120 members of the Knesset, the whole Knesset, cannot change the nature of Israel as a Jewish state and cannot change the nature of Israel as democracy. So the Arab were asking us, well, if you mean that Israel is democracy, why should it be defined as a Jewish state? It should be defined as the state of all its citizens. And the ultra-Orthodox were asking us, if you are saying that Israel is democracy, okay, we agree. We have no complaints about being democracy. But we are wondering, what is the meaning of a Jewish state? Is the Jewish state, is a Jewish state like the Reforms, like the Conservatives, or like the seculars? And because of that, till now, no one is demanding constitution in Israel very firm. Only the Democratic Institute in Israel, the Democracy Institute in Israel are pleading all the time. And I must say that even the High Court of Israel is really believe that it is better to let them interpret the laws of Israel instead of having constitution, as long as we don't have the majority of 80 to change even one letter in the constitution. So we are living in a real, I wouldn't say mess, of course, because we are continuing. And I can assure everyone that Israel is a Jewish state because the people of Israel, the Jewish people of Israel, have no other place. This is after 2,000 years, the first place and land and state for the Jewish people, but on the same way of thinking. We are national, but we are liberal. And we cannot think about living in our state if, God forbid, it will not be a democracy, a full democracy. So I can assure all people that Israel is a Jewish democratic state, democratic Jewish state, Jewish democratic state in one word,
So one way that you showed how democratic you are is that you had to supervise 3 elections in 1 year. That's a lot of democracy.
We are a little bit exaggerating, I must say. But you see, when you don't have majority, we have one sovereign. We have nothing to really hesitate about that. Not the sovereign of Israel is not the president of Israel. He is not even supervising the election. We have a committee headed by the High Court judge, not the prime minister, not the president of the High Court. The sovereign of Israel are the people of Israel. And when the sovereign decide not to decide, we have really to suffer the consequences. So sometimes you can say we are exaggerating. I would say you are absolutely right. I really believe that the people of Israel have to decide, because to rule the country, it is not a privilege of one who have won the election or was elected. It is the duty of the leader that was elected to become the leader of the people, to lead the people. And unfortunately, the coalition and the many agendas that we have in front of us bring us to believe that Israel can live and continue to live without the necessity to create a real stable government. I did everything in order to bring to a coalition. I'm not saying nothing in favor of the coalition or against the coalition, but they managed to create a government. But they have to understand that when you are making a government, you have to cooperate. Coalition means to cooperate. And unfortunately, everyone is accusing the other side that he's not cooperating. Of course, as the president of Israel, I'm not going to interfere. But the problem is, of course, the less of a constitution. And because the constitution could give us answers what will happen if something like what is happening to us could occur once again.
Do you expect a fourth election pretty soon?
As a member, I know, as every citizen in Israel, that it is possible. I'm not expecting anything. I'm expecting the people of Israel and the Knesset to get into understanding.